Frederick, Prince of Wales, never ascended the throne, dying prematurely at the age of 44. He was the eldest son of King George II of Great Britain and Caroline of Ansbach, and the father of King George III. Frederick Louis was born on the 1st of February 1707 in Hanover, then part of the Holy Roman Empire. His birth coincided with a pivotal period in British and European politics. The 1701 Act of Settlement had excluded Catholics from the British throne, and the Electress Sophia of Hanover, Frederick's great-grandmother, was next in line after Queen Anne. When Queen Anne died in 1714, Sophia had already died just weeks earlier, and her son, Elector Georg Ludwig, ascended the throne as King George I of Great Britain. This established the Hanoverian dynasty in Britain. However, young Frederick remained in Hanover and his parents moved to Britain, a separation that would shape his character and contribute to his estrangement with his parents. Frederick's formative years in Hanover were spent under the supervision of guardians and tutors. He became fluent in multiple languages, studied music and literature, and absorbed Enlightenment ideals. Frederick was summoned to Britain in 1728, a year after his father became King George II. At the age of 21, he was formally invested as the Prince of Wales, the title traditionally given to the heir apparent. However, the long years of separation had taken a toll. Rather than bringing unity, Frederick's arrival intensified tensions with his parents. The relationship between Frederick and his father was characterized by bitterness and mistrust. George II reportedly viewed Frederick as irresponsible, vain, and politically unreliable. Meanwhile, Frederick resented being sidelined from government and sought to assert himself independently. He formed his own court at Leicester House, known as the Leicester House Circle. It became a hub of anti-government sentiment, posing a challenge to the authority of both King George II and the Prime Minister Sir Robert Walpole. Though Frederick was legally barred from assuming a formal political role, he positioned himself as a critic of the government and a champion of popular causes. Frederick supported calls for the shortening of parliamentary terms, religious toleration, and greater transparency in government affairs. He patronized writers and thinkers who shared his outlook, including Alexander Pope, James Thomson, and William Hogarth. Frederick worked to portray himself as generous, approachable, and sympathetic to the concerns of the middle class. He contributed to charitable causes, attended public events, and encouraged access to the royal family as symbols of national unity. Despite these efforts, he lacked the political power necessary to bring his ambitions to fruition. His exclusion from council meetings and his reliance on courtiers outside the governing elite ultimately limited his influence. Frederick's most lasting achievements lie in his patronage of the arts and sciences. An accomplished musician and supporter of Enlightenment ideals, he invested heavily in cultural institutions and artists. His court became a vibrant centre of artistic expression and intellectual debate. He was particularly fond of music, supporting composers like George Friedrich Handel and maintaining an orchestra at Leicester House. Though he eventually fell out with Handel, Frederick's early support had a significant impact on the composer's career. He also commissioned architectural projects and fostered interest in neoclassical design. Frederick was involved in the early development of Kew Gardens, which would later become a centre of botanical research under his son King George III. In literature, Frederick sponsored poets such as James Thomson, whose work Rule Britannia became one of Britain's most enduring patriotic songs. He also supported satirical artists like Hogarth, who used his work to critique both royal power and urban life. Through these cultural engagements, Frederick cultivated an identity as a progressive, educated, and benevolent prince. His court contrasted sharply with the more austere and Germanic court of his father. Despite his political and personal difficulties, Frederick enjoyed a largely stable family life with his wife, Princess Augusta of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg, whom he married on the 27th of April, 1736. He was 29 and she was 16 at the time of their wedding. The wedding was arranged for political and dynastic reasons, as was customary among European royalty. However, despite the age difference and the formal nature of the union, the marriage evolved into a genuinely affectionate and stable partnership, offering Frederick a rare refuge from the political and familial storms surrounding his life. Augusta proved to be both loyal and politically astute, often supporting Frederick in his rivalry with King George II and Queen Caroline. She became a central figure at Leicester House, hosting cultural and political gatherings that echoed her husband's independent court. Her support extended into their parenting. The couple raised their children with an emphasis on English identity, morality, and Protestant values. One of the most striking episodes illustrating the couple's defiance against the King and Queen occurred in 1737, when the Princess of Wales was in labour. Defying royal protocol, Frederick whisked her away from Hampton Court to give birth in London, deliberately excluding the King and Queen from the event. The action infuriated George II and Queen Caroline, effectively severing personal relations between the father and son. Frederick and Augusta had 9 children together. Augusta, Duchess of Brunswick-Luneburg, born 1737. King George III of the United Kingdom, born 1738, Edward, Duke of York and Albany, born 1739, Princess Elizabeth of Great Britain, born 1741, William Henry, Duke of Gloucester and Edinburgh, born 1743, Henry, Duke of Cumberland and Strathearn, born 1745, Princess Louisa of Great Britain, born 1749, Prince Frederick of Great Britain, born 1750, and Caroline Matilda, Queen Consort of Denmark and Norway, born 1751. Though often remembered for his strained relationship with his own father, Frederick carved out a different role as a parent. In an age when aristocratic and royal fathers were typically distant, Frederick was regarded as an attentive, affectionate and hands-on father, especially towards his eldest son, Prince George. His approach to fatherhood was progressive for the time, deeply rooted in his desire to instill moral, cultural, and national values in his children. Family life was central to their household at Leicester House. Frederick believed that royal children should not be raised by cold formality, as he had been in Hanover. Instead, he emphasized a nurturing environment that promoted virtue and education. He encouraged his children to speak English rather than German, underscoring his commitment to a more anglicized monarchy. Emphasis on Englishness would have a profound impact on George III, who would become the first Hanoverian king born and raised entirely in Britain. Frederick also took a strong interest in his children's education. He arranged for prominent tutors and scholars to instruct them, exposing them to Enlightenment thought and the liberal arts. In George, he hoped to cultivate the image of a modern constitutional monarch, rational, moral, and connected to the people. Although Frederick died when George was only 12, many of his ideals lived on through his son. Frederick's approach to fatherhood was deeply influenced by his own alienation from his parents, and he seemed determined to break that cycle. Where George II had been cold and distant, Frederick aimed to be loving and present. He often played games with his children, took an interest in their health and well-being, and participated in their upbringing in a way that was unusual for a royal father at the time. After his death in 1751, Augusta continued the parenting philosophy Frederick had championed. While Frederick and Augusta had a mostly happy marriage, Frederick still had mistresses. One of Frederick's most well-documented mistresses was Anne Vane, a maid of honour to Queen Caroline. Their affair began before his marriage and possibly continued afterward, though with less public attention. Anne Vane became a figure of gossip at court, and her relationship with Frederick was widely known. She bore a son named Frederick in 1732 and a daughter Amelia in 1733, both of whom were rumoured to be Frederick's, though he never publicly acknowledged the children. Both children died young. There were likely other mistresses, as some sources suggest he kept up a more typical pattern of aristocratic male behaviour in the 18th century, where royal or noble husbands often maintained extramarital affairs. However, none seem to have rivalled Anne Vane in terms of notoriety. Despite these affairs, Frederick's marriage to Augusta was generally seen as stable and respectful, especially by royal standards of the time. Augusta tolerated or quietly ignored his extramarital behaviour, common among consorts of the time, as long as it remained discreet. On the 31st of March 1751, Frederick died suddenly at the age of 44, reportedly from a pulmonary embolism or pneumonia. His death created a succession dilemma. His eldest son George was only 12 at the time and thus not ready to assume royal duties. When George II died in 1760, George III became king, ushering in a new era of the monarchy. Although Frederick never reigned, his influence on the future king was profound. George III inherited many of his father's values: devotion to duty, interest in the arts and sciences, and belief in a more moral and domestic style of kingship.